Welcome to our webinar today on Energy Master Plans. Our speaker today is Craig Meese. Craig is a graduate of the Colorado School of Mines. He is a licensed professional engineer with over 20 years experience in environmental compliance and 8 years as a county commissioner here in Mesa County. I was very fortunate to have served with Craig during my time in office. Those of you who are elected officials, you know that you cannot be an expert in everything, and yet we are called on to make decisions on a broad range of topics. And when Craig and I took office in 2005, things were really taking off with the natural gas development in Mesa County, and meetings would sometimes be very controversial. And it was a benefit to me to be able to sit next to Craig during those meetings. And he could say, this concern they're stating is legitimate, and here's how we mitigate it, or this statement isn't accurate, and here's the science behind it. And during that time, Craig actually came up with the concept of doing an energy master plan. We have master plans for development in general, but nothing specific to energy development. So we actually searched the country looking for another community who had done something similar. But at that time, we were unable to find anything similar that we could use as a model. So we developed this from scratch, and we found it to be a very helpful tool and wanted to share it with you all in case it's helpful to you. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Craig Meese right now.
Thanks, Janet. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Again, my name's Craig Meese, and as Janet indicated, I had the pleasure of being a county commissioner over the past 8 years, and I guess where we came with regard to the Energy Master Plan back when first took office in 2005 in northwest Colorado in what's called the Piceance Basin of northwest Colorado. We were experiencing very sizable and significant energy development activities at that time. And one thing that always intrigued me with that activity, just like any other activity within a community, whether it be commercial, residential, gravel pits, cell towers, you name it, we don't plan well for energy whatsoever, or weren't planning well for it at all. We knew we had resources in our community. We didn't know necessarily where, we didn't know necessarily what, and we didn't know necessarily what our sensitivities were that surrounded that development. From the start here, as you can see, obviously this is the Piceance Basin, and a lot of the activity is associated with oil and gas. But I got to be honest with you, this energy master plan is not specific to natural gas. It's specific to any energy resource development activity, whether it be renewable or non-renewable. Whether you're citing a wind farm or a solar farm or geothermal or oil and gas, or go down the list, every one of them have their impacts. And more importantly, you've got to identify in your community where these resources are, because not even though the sun shines in all the same places, if you will, there's only certain areas within a community potentially where that solar is of a strength and the environment around it is such to make it a resource worth collecting. And so that's no different than any other energy source. And so again, as I indicated, kind of the objectives behind putting the master plan or energy master plan together was to identify and develop these natural resources within our county. It's very hard to talk about the sensitivities or the mitigations without identifying where these natural resources are. And then certainly to protect the environment by way of understanding where these resources are. Then you can understand the environmental aspects, and again, those sensitivities, and define those sensitivities, whether they be wildlife corridors, whether they be steep slopes, visual corridors. We have scenic byways. We have other sensitivities, obviously, as does every community, to any kind of development. And so we need to identify where these resources are and what those sensitivities are. Obviously, this industry, as any industry, is a job contributor in our community, and so they're very important. We certainly wanted to create an energy master plan because we consider this a planning tool or a communication tool, if you will, where we encourage not only the industry to participate in our community as long as they know the ground rules coming in, and the same thing from the landowner perspective. This tool, this communication tool, allows them to participate in this planning process for the development coming forward. obviously the industry invests in our infrastructure, and this tool also helps us from a master plan perspective for us to figure out where that infrastructure is necessary going forward based upon where these resources are at. And certainly anything that is a planning tool can support local businesses as you're supporting jobs in the community. When back in 2005 through 2007 and 8, we were obviously experiencing some unprecedented growth activity in Mesa County, and I think this plan helped us to give some perspective, if you will, and also helped us rationalize our energy development and maybe what the ups and downs of any energy commodity is, which I got to say really helped save us with regard to not getting too exuberant with our big dollars that we had coming in during those times, and rather help us save for rainy days, which we subsequently then started to experience in late 2008 and 9. And then here again, this highlights all aspects of energy development and then the life cycle of energy development, everything from the exploration production side to the ongoing just develop or production aspect and gas gathering and transmission of that energy, etc. To then, as those resources, if it is a non-renewable resource, then as that resource becomes depleted, then how that reclamation and returning those that infrastructure and that site back to its original standpoint is taken care of. Here is the now we'll start going through some of the steps of the Energy Master Plan. These are pretty important, largely because unless you know what you have, whoops, I don't know what happened there. Unless you know what you have with regard to your resource inventory, it's very hard to put a plan together. It's no different than any kind of land use plan that we would do in local governments for commercial, residential, etc. You got to know what your inventory or where is appropriate for that development to take place. And so that resource inventory with an Energy Master Plan is put together is to identify where are the most likely or most probable areas for, say, a wind farm. Where do we have wind resources that are to a level that they might be then gathered and collected and then transmitted. And the same thing with regard to oil and gas, coal, uranium. We were blessed and somewhat cursed, if you will, depending on your perspective, in Mesa County with about every energy resource potential that's being talked about. So we wanted to identify where all these energy resources were within our county. And then obviously the next step was to identify our environmental sensitivities once those energy resources were determined. And again, those are visual sensitivities, those are noise sensitivities, they're wildlife sensitivities, they're view sheds, scenic byways, there's steep slopes, there's geotechnical sensitivities, all those aspects. And what we did was we engaged then 21st century technology using GIS systems to create polygons and layers for each of these sensitivities, along with the resource layer, which showed us then the resources for each of these various energy resources. And so we created basically layers within our GIS system to show us that. And then the next step, once we identified the sensitivities, is to work with the industry on best management practices. And these best practices are, for instance, if they're in a view shed or a view corridor, and we are reviewing an application for permit to drill through our local governmental designee process with the Oil and Gas Commission, our local governmental designee could easily use this GIS tool that we put in place to identify then if it's in a scenic byway. That might be a concern which we would share then with the Oil and Gas Commission or with the applicant, to then work with them on these BMPs to mitigate that visual issue within that area. Uh, Obviously, with today's technology and drilling in particular, and that was 90% of the issues, obviously, in Mesa County was drilling activity. So with that, with today's technology, there is some latitude for some tolerance with regard to the site location where we could work with them and the landowner to try to find a suitable spot for a well location such that mitigates that visual impact and or use other technologies available, whether it be color schemes or other ways in which to camouflage a site such that it wouldn't impact a scenic byway or a visual corridor. And then as this talks about, this is that GIS technology that I was indicating, was we incorporated all this data into that GIS tool, and we created layers as indicated for not only the resources and each and every resource that we have within our community and where they were at, but also those sensitivities. For each sensitivity, there's a layer as well. And so you can look at all of them or one of them or some of them. And this is a tool not only for the community to be able to use, but also a tool for the industry to be able to use, such that when they found they had a resource potential that they wanted to develop, they could easily, from Texas or anywhere in the world, get on our GIS system through just our website and then determine what are our sensitivities to that location. And that would help, again, with the communication side in particular. And the biggest issue with any industry is just knowing the issue going into a community before you go and try to build something and then find out. So they're able to, any industry is willing to plan and work with you on mitigating these impacts as long as they know those issues on the front end, and it's not after the site has already been developed and or completed. Then they tend to have a less interest in trying to work with those in the community. And then as we entered, and as I'm getting here closer to the end, the policy analysis was such that in Mesa County we had policies in place that frankly were so outdated and so inconsistent with current land development code or even this energy master plan that we went through any energy or mineral extraction and or resource development policy and simply updated them to reflect the 21st century and the times we live in, and also made sure they were consistent across the board. So that was a big part of this process as well, is to get our policies in line with plans and land use documents. And then obviously the public input side of this is always huge, and with any plan, whether it be a community plan, a master plan, the land development plan, or even an energy master plan, community input is a big part of that. So obviously this is no different. And so it is good to certainly hear from the community on those sensitivities, in particular, once they see where these resources are at, and it helps them to understand that these resources are in their backyard and they need to be aware of that going forward. And here's how we plan to try to mitigate those. And here's also how they can participate in that comment process. So it is not only a information sharing opportunity, but very much an educational opportunity for all sides. And the one thing I will say too that we incorporated in Mesa County, which was very, very innovative, and largely a function of the fact that we did have this GIS tool and a very elaborate GIS tool already in place, was we started posting the BLM or Forest Service lease sales for energy development, and that was a huge help to local landowners to be able to understand when the lease sale list came out how it may or may not impact their property and how to comment then accordingly, because they could simply go to the lease map that we would then create through our GIS system and create a layer, if you will, for the lease sale, and then they could see where are those parcels that are being contemplated for the lease sale. that was certainly a helpful tool. And again, this is all about communication. Every bit of this is all about communication, and anytime you communicate on aspects like this, it helps avoid future conflict down the road. And that's the main point of any plan or plan document like this, is to avoid those disagreements and communicate fully. And so really that's really the steps for the energy master plan, why we did it, the reasons for doing it, the value it serves, and certainly the benefits it does for a community. It still is mind-boggling to me that in some of these heavily developed communities that they don't have something similar in place. And as Janet alluded to, we had great difficulty. In fact, we never did find anything that quite matched this of any shape or form. We found communities that had energy policy, but they really didn't have energy plans. And so I don't know how you develop policy without a plan, but at any rate, there's a lot of emotion and misinformation that's out there. And honestly, energy development is something that is very technical and is very easy to utilize scare tactics in order to influence decision makers. And in this case, an energy master plan, as we've pulled together, is truly fact-based and less emotion. And so that was our goal, was to get something so that we could make constructive decisions that certainly protect our community and our sensitivities in our community, at the same time promote and advocate for the opportunities and the economic development that this or any industry brings to a community. The thought that the industry or any industry and the environment are exclusive of one another is ridiculous. You can have both if you plan for it and you communicate, and that's the whole point of this energy master plan.
Thanks, Craig. I just want to interject an example about that supports what Craig was saying about the importance of being able to plan ahead. Craig was notified early on about a company who was putting in a compressor station near the town of Mesa on a scenic byway. And because he got early notice about this, and because he knew some of the players, he was able to say, hey, guys, wait a minute. This is on a scenic byway. Can we possibly move this to a more appropriate location on your parcel? And they were able to do that. But we don't always hear about those things enough in advance. And there really is a huge value of having a plan in place where anybody, anywhere in the world, can go to the website, identify what some of the sensitivities are in the areas that they're planning to develop. So as you continue to post questions, I'll go ahead and ask the first one. What types of policies did you adopt, and what areas do you regulate energy development for your energy master plan?
Well, I guess the policies that we considered was mostly a revision of very outstanding or antiquated policies regarding like uranium development. We had some coal policies. We had and we had policies in place that, Jen, you might recollect this as we reviewed them at the time, but the policies were extremely antiquated and didn't take into consideration current development, I guess, technology in particular, and really also didn't take into account the sensitivities that we now have, certainly as our population in Mesa County had grown significantly, and we weren't just an energy-based community, if you will. We have other industries and other sensitivities. So really, the policy changes that we made were to clean up what we had, and quite frankly, we eliminated quite a few of the outstanding ones, and then we went to a kind of an overall arching policy in Mesa County that followed the master plan from the standpoint that the energy activity and our process, more than anything, more than policy, was simply going to be to work through the LGD process and use this plan to comment accordingly on APDs or siting of compressor stations, pipelines, facilities, transmission lines. I mean, we've used it in a number of applications, not just oil and gas related, but with any kind of energy transmission as well within our community.
Thanks, Craig. And the next question has to do with renewable energy, and they want to know if we included renewables in our energy master plan.
Yeah, we did. We did look at geothermal, we looked at solar, and we looked at wind. We also had uranium uh, opportunities. We had coal. We had so we did. We created layers for each of those, and we used data that was pulled from whether it be from governmental resource maps for those, so that we can incorporate those layers for each of the renewable versus and non-renewables. But we also kind of went with uh, the industries as well. Their um, probably best practices, if you will, or best documents. And because Mesa County is 72% public land, we have a large resource with those federal land agencies from their resource maps that they also have. And so we kind of pulled together all these resource maps for all the various energy resources and created these layers. But it did include renewable and non-renewable resources.
Thanks. Next question. Did you do this with county staff or did you outsource the project?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, because we didn't have, I was kind of the resource for this from a technical standpoint. However, we did use obviously our land use department and our planning department, if you will, for purposes of especially the community meetings and the public input portions. I myself developed our best management practices in consultation with the industry. Those are something that always are evolving and very dynamic and need to change. Our resource maps, whether it be both the sensitivities as well as the energy resources, those were things that we did hire out or contract for to help put that data together into our GIS system. And so we did there's parts and pieces that we did contract out. I think it's just dependent upon your community and what you have already in place. The scope of work probably it is pretty dynamic based upon those resources that you have within your community. The one benefit we had in Mesa County was we had a very good backbone structure with our GIS technology. And so had it not been for that, this project, at least if you wanted to go in that direction using GIS technology, um, it would have been a much more difficult process for us, largely because we wouldn't have had that architecture and framework already in place. So that's kind of I mean that's kind of the basis of how we broke it down. But I'll be honest, like I said, I can't imagine, and I've never seen two communities that are too much alike. So
Right.
I think that scope of work will change based upon the resources you have available and the need that you have for developing some.
Okay, someone just asked if Mesa County's Energy Master Plan is on their website, and the answer is yes. And I've updated this slide so that you can see the link that'll take you directly to it. Okay, Craig, a couple of questions that sort of tie in together, so I'll ask them both and you can answer them in the order that you prefer. First one, explain the relationship between the Energy Master Plan and the County Master Plan. And then second, did you consider indirect impacts with the energy development, such as water, traffic, transportation, infrastructure, etc.?
Yeah. The how it works with the comp plan, it's a part of the comp plan. Um, just like community plans then make up the comp plan, and so it is just a piece of it. It's one piece of several pieces that then facilitate the comprehensive plan, which then develop then policy, which then develop land use code. And so it's just one piece of it. I guess then how with regard to indirect impacts such as water, infrastructure, schools, we certainly have seen any and all of that. I would say from a water standpoint, just speaking from a natural resource standpoint, obviously technology has improved, whether it be uh, again, speaking from the natural gas extraction, which was a big part of what we saw in Mesa County in northwest Colorado, at least at the time, the technology certainly changed significantly to where the recycling of those water resources and then using of the produced water by the industry to mitigate then the consumptive use and irrigation use by domestic users or agriculture uh, changed significantly just with the improvements in technology. I can't say that our energy master plan spoke to that to the extent that we had a sensitivity, such as Plateau Valley or the Plateau Valley drainage or watersheds. Those were sensitivities, again, that we wanted to account for and did account for in our sensitivity layers. As far as transportation infrastructure, the plan highlights where these development potentials are, and so it's a planning tool then to help you then to communicate with the industry on what infrastructure will be needed going forward and what is the development potential. It's hard to have a transportation discussion unless you know the development potential. And so this again is that tool, that communication tool to help you have those discussions with the industry when you have a better understanding of the development potential for a given area uh, once you look at that layer.
Great, thanks. Next, can you give some examples of best management practices that have been used outside of just camouflage of oil and gas facilities?
Let's see. I mean, visual impact was always a biggie. Noise mitigation was also something that was always is always something that's very significant. And then odor. Odor was also something that so we certainly have BMPs in place for each and every one of those, and those BMPs uh, as well as in transportation. I forgot about transportation because we have certainly trucks running up and down roads with bus stops, etc. And so we would be asking operators for like three-phase gathering to mitigate some of the truck traffic or water hauling and things of that nature. So there's a whole menu, if you will, of best management practices based upon again what the sensitivity is in that area or what the potential impact or development potential is for that area. Um, there is quite a whole there's a pretty good laundry list. I guess if I sat here and thought about it, I could create a pretty good list.
Thanks. These are some great questions. The next one is, how does this plan tie into federal plans and requirements that local governments are being inundated with, such as resource management plans, sage grouse, etc.?
That's an awesome question. A good point that I probably forgot to even tie into. One thing that we learned, I guess, and it was going through, I guess, our RMP in our area, our resource management plan with our federal land agency BLM, um, was we learned pretty early on, and it was through an oil shale discussion, that if you don't have a plan in place such as this, such as our energy master plan, that accounts for these activities and how we as a community are going to plan for it, the BLM or federal agencies, frankly, have full reign. Under FLPMA, Federal Land Management Policy Act, we in Mesa County, because we have a master plan in place or an energy master plan in place that also incorporates these areas of federal land, we do have standing with regard to their RMP. And what they come out with is they're going through right now revising their RMP. It's kind of like and maybe if there's lawyers on the line, I'm sure I'll get in trouble by saying this, but kind of like the RS 2477 of roads with regard to our energy master plan, because we now have a planning document in place to account for these development activities. Therefore, if the feds decide to do something in conflict with that, we can then have standing in challenging them on their plan. If we didn't have a plan in place, we have no legal standing necessarily, and so we don't even have a dog in the fight necessarily. So it is a very important tool for a community to be in control of their own destiny versus um, folks from DC being in control of your community.
Good point. Okay, next question. In addition to the energy industry, what other partners participated in the development of the best management practices to address the sensitivities?
Well, to be honest with you, the best in our case, and probably not the best example, I pretty much put the best management practices together just based on my background, experience, and technical abilities. So uh, the BMPs, though, as far as that was though a part of the public process. So certainly, if there were other methodologies to be employed or used with regard to those BMPs, it's a public process, and so to be honest with you, whether it's the industry participating in that public process or the community participating or other entities, whoever that may be. And again, these BMPs, that the BMP part of this in particular is a very living, breathing document because that technology changes very quickly and very fast. I can tell you in my at least 15 years of being on the West Slope in particular, the technology from the day I got out there 15 years ago till today is exponentially different. And so these BMPs do need to be modified, changed, and are very dynamic.
Okay, thank you. You kind of answered this one before, but maybe you have something else to add. It's how was the GIS system developed? I know you mentioned that we did it in-house because we had a pretty robust GIS system, but not all counties have that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we were very blessed in Mason County to have a very good framework to start with. So really, all we were doing was creating then those layers within our already existing GIS framework. And so it really was something that, and anybody on this call or anybody, like I said, in the world can go to mesacounty.gov and click on our online GIS mapping tool and be able to look up everything from uh, your house and assessor information to, again, these layers of sensitivity information, energy resource information. There's a plethora of information out there on our GIS tool.
Thanks. I guess it's appropriate that this question would be the last one, and that is any estimate of the total expense of creating this plan?
I'm trying to remember, Janet, what our total cost was. I think I honestly, I can't, I'm trying to remember from the parts that we outsourced, which was the development of the resource maps, and then the review and revision of our policies, and then our let's see, our energy resource maps, our sensitivity maps.
And then
I mean, I'm trying to think, wasn't it like 150,000 or something like that?
I think that sounds about right. And of course, that cost also included all the community and public meetings. Initially, we had tried to do that on our own, but we later brought in someone else to do it. And when it gets controversial, it does really help to have someone else managing those meetings. But looking back, I think we probably could have done it a little cheaper, but keep in mind we were inventing the wheel as we couldn't find any other model. And we did have one more question come in, and that is, are there any resources that could help develop the GIS tool?
Well, there's lots of consultants out there that would love to do your GIS technology and put your GIS framework in place. It's an effort, to be quite honest with you. It just depends on how elaborate you want to make it. I mean, we literally in Mesa County were spending and are still, to my knowledge, unless they've changed the budget, we spend over, I believe, $250,000 a year just maintaining that GIS infrastructure and database. And so, I mean, to think it again, it's just a matter of how elaborate, what functionality you want to give that GIS tool, as to then how much it could cost to develop and then maintain.
Yes, and just to clarify here, we had our GIS system already in place before we started the Energy Master Plan. So we didn't just decide to spend $250,000 just for this use. We use it for a lot of things, elections, assessor, those types of things. I think there are some pretty inexpensive ways people could do this. Like you said, Craig, it depends on how elaborate you want to be. Could use Google Maps or those types of things.
If your only reason for doing it is and development of a document such as this and an online tool, you could do it fairly cheaply because it'd just be in development of those polygons, as I indicated, in those layers that you use other resources for that information. So, I mean, you could really do it fairly inexpensively, and as Janet indicated, using Google Maps, etc., to facilitate then the displaying and presenting of that data.
Thanks, Craig. That does wrap up our webinar for today on Energy Master Plans. Thanks for joining us. We were glad to have so many questions. It made for a much more interactive session. And a big thanks to Craig Meese for taking the time to share with folks how Mesa County created their Energy Master Plan. You've got Craig's contact information and mine on the slide here, so feel free to contact us at any time. Thank you.